Amity just said, we are recording this webinar, so we've got this as a record. And as we go forward, if there are questions or when we get to motions, I would ask you to please state your name. So we've got that on the record, and we're able to then record and who actually made a motion or asked a question. If we work hard today, and I saw Amity had just changed this. Originally, we were going to be working till 4 p.m. So if you all looked at the latest version, it's now noon time for those who are in Central Time and 1 o'clock for those of us who live in Eastern. So we really have a challenge today to really work hard. We got a lot to do, but we've got a little breathing room here in terms of how time we for us to get our business done today. You also will notice that we made some adjustments, and a note was sent out just because there are other issues we know that many of the commissioners are having to work around or work with, particularly with children at home and things like that. So there's some items that we will pick up at a future meeting, but we clearly have an agenda that keeps us moving forward with the path that we're on, so we're ready to operate after the first of the year. So with that quick, brief statement to start, let me ask Amity if she would call the roll, please, to make sure we've got a quorum.
Absolutely. Commissioner David Hanson.
Present.
Commissioner Alan Levine.
Here.
Commissioner Terrence Patterson.
Here.
Commissioner Derwin Cisnet.
Here.
Commissioner Eddie Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Wendy Tucker.
Here.
Vice Chairwoman and Commissioner Chris Richards. I do know Chris is here. She has checked in. And Chairman and Commissioner Tom Griscom.
I am here.
Mr. Chairman, all commissioners are accounted for.
Thank you, Amity. We have a special guest this morning, Dr. Morrison, who's Executive Director for the State Board of Education, and she's been on maternity leave at the time that we were meeting, organizational meetings. So she sort of decided to join us for a few minutes this morning. So Dr. Morrison, good morning, and you have some thoughts, advice that you'd like to share with us.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Not so much advice, but just a big thank you and a chance to say hello. It's great to see many of your faces. I've talked to several of you in the last few weeks, and I know you've been busy. So it's great to see the work moving forward despite our challenges, and technology seems to be working for the most part, so this is great. I'll just say a couple of things, and then if there's time, I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has about the work that we've been engaged in at the state board as it relates to the work that you all will be taking over here before too long. First, it's been a real privilege. It's been part of the work that has gotten me most excited over the last few years, in particular because it's just such a great window into the world of schools and students across our state. It gives you a firsthand seat at the joys, the challenges, the things that we need to be wrestling with as a state to better serve students. And so it's a real privilege to get to sit in these positions where you have the ability to green light schools and then work closely with them as they move into operation mode and begin serving students. So it's also a rare position to be in when you look across the U.S. in terms of models for operators or for authorizers. And I know you all know this, but NACSA will be talking to you later today about sort of the authorizing role. And that's critically important, as we know, to making sure that the right schools are able to open. But I think perhaps the most challenging and unique aspect of our work in Tennessee when it comes to charter schools at the state level is the actual LEA role that you serve. So moving through that green light process, then serving as the LEA of record for these schools has been, for our team, I would say probably the most challenging and also the most rewarding, because that's really where you get your inside view and work with these leaders and these incredible teachers to serve students across the state. So I know you'll look forward to that, but I also should just let you know, I think that's really the work, the hardest part. I'm also incredibly proud of our team. I know they've been working closely with you all, but it's been something that we've really taken seriously, obviously, at the board, and we've put a lot of time and effort into, and I'm pleased that the transition is going so smoothly. I hope we've been able to be a good partner for you all, and I hear that we're going to be located on the same floor at Davy Crockett, which is fantastic. That means we'll be able to continue with this work and help this transition.
Going in and out, if everyone could put their phones on mute. Trouble hearing you.
Oh, pause for a minute. Oh, yeah, is that a little better?
It was for a second.
I think it's Chris. Chris, are you on mute? Because you keep popping up on my screen as talking.
Yeah, I think that's better. Well, I won't rehash everything I said, but just, suffice to say, this is really important and challenging work. I'm thrilled that the transition is going so smoothly. I'm really excited that we're going to be co-located, it sounds like, in Davy Crockett on the same floor, because that'll just enable us to be in close partnership as you all take over the schools that we've already authorized, and look forward to the applications that will be coming to you in the coming years. It's a really unique position that we serve in this authorizing and LEA role, and it's a chance to really, I think, ensure that the right schools are getting to open and serve kids well. We learn a lot from these schools at the state level, so I hope that we'll be able to continue to share those lessons across the commission and the state board. I would also, last thing, and then again, Chairman, if there's any questions for me, I'm happy to take any questions, but I would just encourage you, and I know Wendy Tucker's on the commission, which is great. That'll be a really strong through line in terms of what the state board has done and what the commission will be taking on. But our state board members are really eager to hear from you and work with you if you have any questions. If the state board member that represents your area or anyone else on the board is someone that you would want to reach out to or have reached out to you, let me know, because we can make those connections if you haven't been able to do that yet. I know they'd love to connect with you on this work if you've got questions and just want to think through some of the decision points that you may be anticipating. So know that they're a resource for you as well as the state board staff, and we're here to do everything we can to make this a really smooth transition for our schools and for you all as commissioners. So thanks for having me this morning, and Chairman, I'll turn it back to you, but happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Well, thank you, Dr. Morrison. I appreciate your comments this morning to us. And let me just open it up. Do any commissioners have questions for Dr. Morrison?
To serve as a public charter school authorizer and LEA for any charter school it authorizes. The Commission has convened in an effort to prepare, train, and review rules and policies required to fulfill its tasks for the upcoming year. Given the time-sensitive nature of these items and the governor's executive orders prohibiting in-person meetings, this meeting is being held via electronic means, and a call-in number was provided to the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you so much for the work you're doing to support us. I'll share again to other commissioners, I know how invaluable you've been within just a short period of time, so thank you. At this time, I want to recognize any commissioner who may wish to make any opening remarks. Is there anybody that would like to say something at this point in the agenda? I see none. So since this is an electronic meeting, TCA 8-44-108(5) requires all votes be taken by call the roll. I would also remind commissioners and presenters to identify themselves before speaking or making a motion or a second. I would hope that our presenters avoid acronyms and things like that maybe not everybody would understand, so that the public can clearly engage and be part of and realize the context of each conversation. So with that, we're going to move to the consent items. and this will recall a roll call. There are two items on the agenda as consent items. One is the adoption of our agenda, and the second is the approval of the minutes from the commission organizing meeting on February 18 and 19, 2020, at a time when we all met in person. At some point, we will get back to that, I'm sure. So do I have a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, Eddie Smith, I move the adoption of the agenda.
Thank you, Eddie. Do I have a second?
Mr. Chairman, Terrence Patterson, a second.
Terrence, thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, MD, may I ask you to call the roll?
Yes, sir, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, MD, may I ask you to call the roll?
Yes, sir, Chairman. As soon as I pull it back up on my computer. Commissioner David Hanson.
Aye.
Commissioner Alan Levine. Commissioner Terrence Patterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Chris Richards. She is on her phone. She was having technical difficulties. Commissioner Derwin Cisnet. As soon as I pull it back up on my computer. Commissioner David Hanson.
Aye.
Commissioner Alan Levine. Commissioner Terrence Patterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Chris Richards. She is on her phone. She was having technical difficulties. Commissioner Derwin Cisnet. We'll have to get better at this roll call vote thing online. Commissioner Eddie
He's
Smith.
saying, I'm sorry, Derwin is saying aye and waving, but it's muted or we just can't hear him.
Got it. Thank you, Wendy. Commissioner
The visual's there.
I know, that's good.
Eddie Smith votes yes.
That's right. Commissioner Wendy Tucker.
Yes.
Chairman Tom Griscom.
Yeah.
We'll have to get better at this roll call vote thing online. Commissioner Eddie
He's
Smith.
saying, I'm sorry, Derwin is saying aye and waving, but it's muted or we just can't hear him.
Got it. Thank you, Wendy. Commissioner
The
Eddie
visual's there.
I know, that's good.
Eddie Smith votes yes.
That's right. Commissioner Wendy Tucker.
Yes.
Chairman Tom Griscom.
Yes.
Very good. Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now, I'm trying to do this so y'all don't have to see my hair did not grow out, so I've still got short hair up top, but I'm going to finally have to look down just for a minute here. Yes.
Very good. Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now, I'm trying to do this so y'all don't have to see my hair did not grow out, so I've still got short hair up top, but I'm going to finally have to look down just for a minute here. There are some report items that I want to share before we get into presentations. And Amity, I'm going to call on you, please, to make those the report items to the commission.
Absolutely. I just wanted to update you quickly, and it is going to be quickly for the sake of time, so feel free to call me if you need any additional clarification. We have executed contracts as of yesterday for a search firm, McPherson and Jacobs, for the search for the executive director, as well as one contracted staff, Chris Reynolds, who is joining us today. on the line, and you'll have additional time to meet Chris in the future, but Chris will be running point on the committees and as well as assisting with the full board, full commission meetings in the future. And then of course, the chairman has already introduced our interim general counsel, Chanel Tyler, who is running point for us in just really very aggressive timelines to ensure that the commission has adopted rules and policies to make sure that you are prepared to hear appeals in January of 2021. Again, I'm happy to provide you any updates in addition to that by phone call. The search firm is scheduled to have a slate of candidates to the Business Operations Committee by May the 15th.
Yeah, and
It's on schedule.
Yeah, to that point, may I ask you a story? I mean, the movement through state government to get these contracts approved, Amy and I have been talking for a couple of weeks. She kept pushing on this, and to get the approval in what I'm gonna call record time, particularly when state government is wrestling with all the other issues that we're dealing with as individuals, to get these through and have them ready to go keeps us at least on the path that we were on in being able to make an executive director selection. So, but Amity, I was sharing with all the commissioners, if you want somebody who knows how to sort of push things through, she did a great job. She stayed on this and we got it done.
Well, the department has a great procurement team. At the beginning of the week, it wasn't going to be approved until May 4th, and then suddenly they were executed yesterday. So really just an amazing procurement team of 2 at the department, if you can believe that. They managed to get it done. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Amity before we move on?
It's Wendy. I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I just wanted to welcome, I'm assuming he's on the line, Chris Reynolds. Want to welcome everyone, but I want to welcome Chris. I had the honor of working with him in Nashville when he was running Lead Public Schools. He is a student-centered, fierce advocate for kids, and I'm really excited that he's part of our startup team. So welcome, Chris.
That seems to be the general consensus when we've advised everyone that Chris has come on board. Was a wonderful choice and great acquisition for the commission to help lead some of this work.
Thank you, Wendy, very much. So seeing no other requests to comment, we're going to move into our presentations. So first up is going to be the NACSA training, and and I'm going to apologize up front, Karega Roush, who is the interim CEO and Vice President of Research and Evaluation, and Aaron Marcella, sorry, and I messed that one up too, who's Associate Director of Authorizing, Engagement, and Advancement, will be our presenters. So I assume they are with us. And again, I apologize for the record. I know I did not pronounce the names well, but I did the best I could. And I'm going to turn it over to you all, invite you to our meeting, and thank you for sharing with us the insights that you're going to give us today.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and did a great job with names. Thank you. And thanks to the commission. Many thanks to the board, Amity, Tess, and others for the opportunity to engage you all on best practices and quality authorizing. Obviously, we were all excited to do this, being in each other's presence before, but in the spirit of being good educators and good citizens, we're going to make the best of what we have during this time, and are very still excited to engage the commission in your critically important work. Let's see, Aaron, can we go ahead and put the slide deck up for commissioners?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Marwa. I'm just going to quickly share my screen and get our deck queued up.
And as you are pulling it up, may I ask if there are commissioners who have questions, what is the best way for them to let you know? And again, I'll ask to be identified by name, but what is the best way for us to ask you all a question during your presentation?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. We have built-in sections for questions at the end of kind of each section. We also very much would welcome commissioners asking questions at any point in time throughout. If they just want to unmute themselves and ask a question, we will be very happy to respond in the moment. Does that suffice for you, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, thank you. That is fine. I appreciate that. Thank you much.
Very good. As the chairman indicated, my name is Kariga Rausch, and I serve as the interim president and CEO of the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. For those that don't know, we'll also refer to that as NACSA. And we are really excited about the opportunity and time that we have together today. If you can go to the next slide there, please, Aaron. So we're excited about what the next bit of time that we have together has in store. And here's how we plan to use our time. So my colleague Aaron and I will do very brief introductions, followed by some of the best thinking that we have around your role as commissioners. We will then spend a little bit of time talking about the decisions that you all make, including the tensions that you're going to grapple with, and how to really focus on making merit-based high-stakes decisions. We'll then take a short break and then dig into some of the technical elements that staff are going to engage in, including applications, performance contracting, renewal, and revocation. And then we'll wrap up. It's our hope that at the end of this session, you have a stronger sense of your role as a commissioner, a stronger sense of what your staff should be doing in supporting you in making those high stakes decisions, and some insight into the challenges associated with making high stakes decisions in a very public and oftentimes politicized process. We can go to the next slide, please. Aaron and I are going to briefly introduce ourselves, but I wanted to say a few things about NACSA. The National Association of Charter School Authorizers, we're the only organization that has an exclusive focus on improving authorizing practices across the country. And we believe that that's best done by improving access, autonomy, and accountability for students, families, and communities. We're not a political organization, but rather we're an organization that deeply believes that the work of authorizing, when done well, is the linchpin of quality schools that students have access to. Sometimes it's really important to point out that every charter school has an authorizer. So the overall quality of charter schools over time is determined by the quality of authorizing. That's what makes this commission's role so very important. Also, just wanted to say that NACSA has been deeply involved in the startup and support of most new charter authorizing entities over the years. And we're bringing kind of that expertise to this overview and training. So please take advantage of the expertise that we've built by both asking questions on the subject matter itself and any other questions that you may have in your role as a commissioner. And like we talked about before, we built in time throughout for questions, but please stop us and ask questions as we are going through the training and the content. If you can go to the next slide, please. So as indicated, I'm joined on this training by Aaron Marwa from NACSA's Authorizer Engagement Advancement Division. The only other piece of introduction that I wanted to do about myself is I've been in your shoes. So in addition to being an authorizing staff member for a number of years, I was also the chair of the Indiana Charter Schools Board and was appointed by our Speaker of the House and appointed chair by our governor. So I have some unique insights into your role as a commissioner, at least as it pertains to the time that I spent as a commissioner with the Indiana Charter School Board, our statewide authorizer. So let me also let Erin introduce herself briefly to you before we jump into some content.
Great. Hello and good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So I am WebExing or Zooming in from Chicago today. Again, really excited to be with you all. I've worked at NEXA since 2012 and have been lucky to work with many different kinds of authorizers in many different capacities over the years, primarily with their application process work, and then most recently as an evaluator of authorizing policies and practices. So excited to be here with Cariga and looking forward to digging in on both decision-making and practices with you all today.
Great. Thank you, Erin. So let's jump into some content and really start with your unique dual authorizing role and the pathways that schools may engage you. If we can go to the next slide. So your commission is unique nationally in the two roles that you play. First, you're an authorizer on appeal. And that means that when a local district makes a decision that an applicant or school doesn't agree with, they may appeal to you. And when a local district declines a new school application or does not renew a school's charter at the end of the contract term or decides to revoke a charter prior to the contract ending, those decisions may be appealed to you. So in that first box that you can see there on the screen, an authorizer on appeal, there are three different kinds of things that may come to you. Then, if you make a merit-based decision that's different than the district on a new start or on a renewal, for the most part, you will become the school's authorizer. And that means that you're now responsible for all of the responsibilities any other authorizer has, in addition to, as was indicated before, being the LEA for that school, which requires some additional oversight responsibilities. To give you a national sense, that dual role where you are an authorizer on appeal and with the ability to then oversee schools is unique. There was one other authorizer, the now defunct Illinois Charter Commission, that had that dual role. Today, probably the closest analog is how appeals work in the state of California. So if a local district denies a charter petition or renewal request, they can then appeal to the county or to the state board. And either of those entities can become the authorizer and accept the appeal, but they're not the LEA. So you all are occupying a very unique space in the roles that you play kind of nationally in authorizing. That also does have some implications for you all to think about as you are thinking about your planning, your strategies, and your methods of engagement. One of the most important ones is that as instructed, you're never going to receive a brand new charter school application that somebody else hasn't looked at or reviewed. So that also means that you're not going to be able to really proactively try to grow or shape your portfolio of schools. You'll only be able to oversee the schools that are denied and that come to you. And so what that means is that your merit-based decisions become really important in terms of the schools that you may then be responsible for, given that you can't proactively kind of go out and try to grow your portfolio. Now, if we go to the next slide, when you do become a school's authorizer, right, that is when you've made a decision that's different than the local district's decision, you're now responsible for oversight of that school. And that means ultimately that you and the staff are responsible for setting expectations and engaging in smart oversight and then making high stakes renewal decisions. While always one of the three core responsibilities that are a part of the long-standing principles and standards that all high-quality authorizers attend to are maintaining high standards, upholding school autonomy, and protecting student and public interests. That can look differently in a lot of different ways, but really important to understand that no matter what decisions you make, those have got to be the three areas that you're always mindful of. Are we maintaining high standards? Are we making sure that schools have the maximum flexibility necessary to figure out what kids and families need? And are you taking steps to protect student and public interests? And sometimes those things can be in tension with each other, for sure. One of the most significant areas of tension that we've seen across the country in these areas, and Wendy, I'm sure, would have insights on this, is when you think about students with disabilities, for example, right, where authorizers have a critical role to play in making sure that those students are receiving a very high quality education, while at the same time making sure that you are not so far into a school's operations that in fact you are the ones and staff are the ones that are trying to provide instruction, right, or getting too deep into things, which is a violation of a school's ability to figure out what it needs to do for said kids. So these things can be in conflict and require good, thoughtful decision making and good, thoughtful deliberation in very real time in your role as commissioners, and ultimately what staff do. Okay, let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about your role as commissioners vis-a-vis what you should be expecting staff to do. And we want to spend a little bit of time here because it's really important from the outset to have great clarity on what the commission does and what you should expect staff to do. Because being a commissioner means that you do not do all the work of authorizing. It should become as no surprise, but that's why you have staff. But there are some tensions here that we want to kind of explore together and to make sure that we've got some clarity. Tennessee's adopted some really great sets of quality authorizing practices that revolve around the 5 areas on the pie chart in the slide that you see. And that's all based on really good, strong evidence as to what's necessary to be a high quality authorizer. And we're going to walk through each of those areas shortly in terms of agency commitment and capacity, right? So what do commission and staff need to execute on this at a high level? Processes and systems around application appeals, executing a thoughtful, outcomes-oriented performance contract, and go about smart oversight and evaluation. Then when you have to make additional high-stakes revocation or renewal decisions, we're going to dive into each of those briefly here shortly. But what we wanted to spend some time on here is getting clarity on within all of these areas, what's the commission's role and what's staff's role. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to start trying to get a sense of what your initial thinking is on the role of commissioners by taking a quick poll, and we're going to see if we can make this work. So in the chat function or the chat box, what we want for you to do is to type in the letters of the slides of the areas you think are the general responsibilities of commissioners, right? So, and you can type in all that you think apply. These are some of the areas that commissioners and or staff are engaged in. Curious your thinking around what the general responsibilities of commissioners are. So let's go ahead and take a few minutes to do that in the chat function.
This is Wendy. While people are doing that, can I ask a quick question?
Please do.
You mentioned earlier that we are unique in the country for the appellate authorizing and then basically the oversight piece of authorizing. Is that because of the appellate piece? Because there are certainly direct state level authorizers that then oversee their schools, right? We're not unique in overseeing charters at the state level. We're unique in the pairing of it being by appeal and then overseeing. I just want to make sure I understand that. Okay.
Yes,
okay,
that's right. And so across the country, there are, generally about 1,000 authorizers. And most of them play what's a more typical authorizing function. The combination of your role of being an authorizer on appeal that can become an authorizer of that school, that is nationally unique. And then adding in that you have LEA responsibilities also makes you different than some other authorizers where and for those of you who don't have some familiarity around LEA responsibilities, we can talk a little bit about that later. But there are a lot of instances where the school is its own LEA for purposes of special education or funding or those kind of things. You have some responsibilities to schools to play in that role. Again, a unique element of what you do.
Great, thank you. I think somebody may be unmuted and have some background noise. Is that Chris again?
No, it doesn't look like it.
Okay, it stopped.
I'm working on it, yeah.
Thanks.
So thanks for that.
Thank you, Korea.
Oh, no, thanks for that question, Wendy. And so it looks like we've got a lot of alignment on A and B. This is actually one of those questions where there isn't a clear-cut right or wrong answer, but there is a pretty clear-cut right or wrong answer. And so if we can go to the next slide. It is important to spend a little bit of time in this space around role of commission and staff. And so you can, there are, Aaron, if you can go ahead and just pull all of the bullet points up there for folks to see, that would be great. Where as commissioners, you have two primary roles, and most folks got right from A and B before. And that is to make high stakes decisions and to receive recommendations, evidence-based, merit-based recommendations from staff that aid in your decision making. Those are your primary roles. You have staff whose job it is to manage the day-to-day work of authorizing, to interact with the schools, to collect the information, and to generate recommendations for you in making these decisions. Now, there are some ways in which these lines can get blurred that we have found are counterproductive when these roles aren't clearly defined and everybody's on the same page with. Let me give you a couple of real examples where some of these lines have been blurred. There have been instances in different places across the country where commissioners have independently called school leaders just to see how things are going. That can create a host of issues or problems, especially when staff don't know about it, and when it's really staff's job to be the ones that are interacting with schools. That doesn't mean you have to be like totally separate, right, from schools. There may be ways that staff want to, kind of involve and engage you, but it's really critical that commissioners remember the distinction between your role and staff's role. So we have found, and in that particular instance, when a couple of commissioners were calling school leaders that they knew, just kind of see how things were going, they then talked about those conversations in the context of a renewal conversation, a renewal decision, right? That in their mind usurped all of the information that staff provided to commissioners in making that decision. We found that kind of an activity, when you start blurring those lines, can become highly problematic. I'll give you one other example that we've seen to kind of guard against and be mindful. And that is one of the activities that staff may engage in, especially as it pertains to any kind of due diligence that it might do with the school, or any kind of site visits, or any kind of ways that they're getting information around how schools are doing. Are commissioners going on those evaluative site visits with staff and using their impressions as the sole focus of how they think about the school, right? So this was an example in a Western state where a commissioner demanded to go on a renewal site visit with the staff. So the school in this particular instance had a 5-year charter, and this was in their 4th year of review, and the commissioner said, I want to see firsthand what's going on in that school, and demanded to go on the site visit with staff. And their impressions of what they saw in a focus group of teachers, a focus group with a select group of families, and general classroom observations on one day were the sole reasons that commissioner voted against staff's recommendations to them. So again, getting real clear on the importance of commissioners making high stakes decisions and getting really good information from staff to help in your high stakes decisions are the core, most important, and sole responsibilities that commissioners should have. You have staff to manage the day-to-day, to do the school interaction, and to collect information and make recommendations to you. Questions about that? That's one of the, I think, key outcomes we wanted, here. This will play out in different ways as you operationalize your planning. But what we have found is that getting real clear here is super important. Any questions before we move on?
Karika, this is Tess Stovall. I just wanted to share from a state board's perspective, and I know Angie Sanders is on the line too, where we've seen this come up in particular around appeals is when applicants reach out directly to state board members and share additional information that was not collected by the staff as a part of the record. And so really, I think as you all are looking at your policies and procedures and your rules, really making sure that's clear about what you all are considering as a part of the record versus conversations that, in our case, state board members may have had offline with an applicant and then bringing that information to the state board discussion when not everyone has seen that. Now, Angie, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to share from that context for the commissioners.
Sure, Tess. So my only additional comment to that was when that did happen at a state board decision-making meeting, we had to caution those members that yes, they can certainly have those conversations if a school reaches out to you. The issue then comes in when we're talking about the requirements of the statute and the board's rules and policies that say that the decisions have to be made on the record. And so those are things that are outside of the record. And so we had to caution our members that they could not use any of those conversations or additional information that they may have gained outside of the record in their decision making.
And I'll hop in. This is Wendy. Since I was in those meetings, I made it a practice because I knew all of the charter leaders in Nashville. I knew some of them in Memphis. And when they were filing for, there were several that came up on appeal to the state board when they were trying to open new schools. And I just made a practice to tell them, I'm happy to have coffee with you. I'm happy to have lunch with you. I am not going to discuss your appeal or any of the facts surrounding it unless I'm discussing it in an open meeting with the other members. And I don't think we were required to do that, but I thought that was easier than trying to split in my brain what they told me and what was part of the record. It just was cleaner. So I would recommend that.
So certainly an effective practice, and want to also make this tangible before we move on to this next section. That pressure you're going to feel is real. And I can't tell you when I was in your role, sometimes your friends will call you. They'll want to talk about something else and weave this in, right? You may know, right, people in these instances and in these settings, right, that, maybe you see at the grocery store or in your neighborhood or go to your church. That actually happened to me, where I had somebody that, was a deacon in our church that was a board member at a school that wanted to get a charter to do great things. And like Wendy said, I had to, and think it's an effective practice, to just say, we're friends, but we can't talk about this. We just can't because it's just not, it's not good for anybody for us to have these conversations. But it's hard when these people are your friends, these people that you work with. But in your role as a commissioner with important high stakes decision-making responsibilities for the public and for kids and families, you have got to do your best to not separate the personal from the professional, but to bear in mind you've got some different responsibilities as a commissioner that are going to influence how you have to interact with folks. But those realities it's really hard to do when folks are your friends and folks that are trying to do good things. You have got to, as was pointed out before, go on the record that's provided to you, and you have to trust that your staff is going to know and do a whole lot more about that school than you will. And you have to understand the work that they're doing to provide you with the very best information necessary for you to make that high stakes decision.
Tom Griscom, let me move this a little bit further. So let's talk about your recommendation when it's a lobbyist who's been hired to represent a school or somebody else. I mean, I think I know the answer, but I want to put this out there so we have a general understanding from your point of view and what you've seen as a best practice, because that's also real time, as we know.
Absolutely. I cannot think of probably a more dangerous situation than for a commissioner to be influenced by a lobbyist. It opens up cans of worms that, when played out in public, can damage, if not put a death knell in the commission's ability to be seen as making evidence-based decisions in the best interest of kids. So best practice in this space, very similar to Friends and others, do not have conversations about schools that are coming to you on appeal or that you are overseeing or that you may oversee or come to appeal to you. That's kind of the national best practice in this space. I'm curious, Mr. Chairman, if you've got any other reactions or others have reactions to that.
This is Wendy again. I'll say that we saw that occur at the state board, but I think board members, I know I did, and I think the other board members were quick to put distance. And I think then the lobbyists reach out and test, you know, you can add to this. The lobbyists reach out to the staff, and then the staff dealt with it. However, the staff, you know, it's much more appropriate for the staff to hear what they have to say, decide if they want to have them speak at, you know, whatever they want to do, but we had to keep our separation. And I think every board member, to my knowledge, again, we didn't talk because we had open meetings discussions, or open meetings laws, but my understanding is no one interacted inappropriately there.
I appreciate your response, but just wanted to ask that so that we all benefited. I think everybody who's on this commission been in situations where other people reach out to you, but it's trying to say, it's one thing if it's somebody connected to a charter, it's another thing if it's somebody who's been employed to help influence the decision. So thank you for your answer.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, and just to amplify a little bit around what Wendy said, in addition to kind of saying it's inappropriate for us to talk about this, have them, whether whomever it is, it would be appropriate for them to get information to staff. Staff knows how to manage all kinds of incoming information that will go into the evidence-based record. That's their job as professional folks in this space.
Farida, can I just one more thing on this slide? I think you're about to go on, and I don't want to take it forever. The interact with schools piece with staff. The reason that's on here, I think, is critical. I think it's really important to understand that. What the state board staff was able to do so well was figure out places where we could interact, where it wasn't interacting in a like management kind of way. So like ribbon cuttings or events at the school that we were able to attend, so that state board members were, like the commission, members of the state board were there because they care about kids and care about schools. And so being able to be at the school level in some capacity was important, but we were able to do tours. We were able to do it in a way that didn't interfere with the work and didn't cause conflicts with the management piece. So I just wanted to point that out as something I hope we can do as a commission, be able to see the schools, but not like get our hands into it and create problems.
It's a fantastic point, Wendy. And no doubt staff will look for, and in some instances create opportunities, right, for commissioners to have not only an understanding of how schools are operating as part of their role in kind of keeping you updated and informed, but to be able to be visible and be seen and understand the importance, kind of why, right, behind what you do. Because as you're in your role as a commission, you have to have a small arm's length distance from a school. Again, that's staff's responsibility, but that also doesn't mean that you don't need that shot in the arm from time to time. That matters when you can see kids getting a great education. So no doubt that's important for staff to find opportunities to do. And kind of building on that point, if we can go to the next slide. As you think about, kind of a part of that why, the sole focus of the work of authorizing is that middle triangle, right, where it says improved educational outcomes for kids. And you do that by maintaining high standards, upholding school autonomy, protecting student public interest, like we've talked about before. I do want to just say a little bit before we, kind of keep moving on that uphold school autonomy part. That becomes pretty important. We meaning NACSA, recently did a research study on that topic. And what we found is that is an area for improvement that we can, talk about at some future time as the commission needs to and as staff kind of get systems and things up and running. But oftentimes it can become really easy to pile on more expectations, more regulations, more stuff for schools to do in responding to our oversight responsibilities. But sometimes that can then take the form of schools spending too much time on compliance-based activities rather than maximizing time that they're spending teaching kids and families. And so keep that autonomy area also in mind as a really important area around how to make sure we get improved educational outcomes. So let's wrap up this section with, we think is an interesting quote there on the next slide, in that charter schools are nimble and more accountable, but that's built on the premise that it's a privilege to educate America's kids. And that privilege is something that has to be earned. It's not something that once they kind of have a charter and you've indicated that it's good and useful for them to have it, that they then serve kids in perpetuity. The work of educating kids is something that is a solemn promise, that when you say yes to somebody, that they are engaging our country's greatest asset. And that's a privilege that needs to be earned over time. All right, let me go to the next slide. Are there any other questions before we, on this particular one around kind of your role? To give you a sense, we're going to now transition into some of the pressures of making quality decisions. But I'm curious if there are any questions before we move on around your role as a commissioner. Hopefully this section has helped you understand a little bit more around kind of the uniqueness of your role and good discussion on some conceptual clarity between your role and staff's role. Any other questions that folks may have or issues they wanted to raise in this section? All right, hearing none, let's go to the next section, which is really about some of the pressures you're going to face in quality decision making. Go to the next slide, Aaron. So as you can see right on this slide, decision making based on quality, the most important thing that charter schools do are educating kids. They are also responsible for a lot of other areas, including all their operations and a budget, which means your understanding of how a school is operating must be holistic and based on a lot of information, including how well they're serving kids. If you go to the next slide, to kind of reiterate that the work that staff is going to do in your role as an authorizer on appeal, they're going to be looking at these areas and making evidence-based recommendations to you from their review. So when a district denies a school a new charter and they elect to appeal to you, staff is going to be looking at the degree to which they meet standards on the meet or exceed standards on the Tennessee Department's application scoring rubric. They're going to be looking at if the application is in the best interest of students, the district, and the community. Your law also says that they'll be reviewing if the school has a negative fiscal impact on the local district and is contrary to the best interests of students in the community. If it is a district denies a renewal petition for a school, they decide to appeal that. The standard of evidence there is if it's in the best interest of students. And if a district decides to revoke a charter before the contract is up, then your appeal, what staff will then recommend to you will be, is a decision contrary to what the law says in terms of standards for revocation. Now, wanted to provide you with this level of information now because these are the kinds of things that folks are going to push on when they may disagree or agree with staff's recommendation to you. And that's where things become complicated and why then the decisions you make are highly in a highly charged kind of environment. You can go to the next slide. When you are in the process of making these kinds of decisions, you are going to be in positions where it is a highly charged environment. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about kind of the pressures you're going to feel and ways that in your other lives have kind of managed those. But to give you like some lessons from experience, when there is something really difficult about making a decision on a school, when kids come to a public meeting and talk about why this can be a life-saving and life-altering option for them, or when parents come and talk about what this particular application or what this school, right, might mean to their families, or when folks come and say that this petition or this school is going to decimate other public education in general, or is going to decimate schools in our community and we don't want them. I mean, you all have been around, you know the kinds of things that are talked about in charter schooling in general. Those pressures become magnified when you are in a place having to make those kind of decisions. I'll tell you, I got lots of letters and emails and comments on websites and even phone calls from lots of people trying to influence decisions that we were making when I was a state commissioner here in my home state of Indiana. And like we said, right, this is a public process. So if you go to the next slide, what we want to spend just a little bit of time talking about is how we get this quality decision right, where we know that in order to make a high quality decision, your role as a commissioner, it's got to be evidence-based, it's got to be transparent, and it's got to be fair. What we want to spend a little bit of time talking with you about is how you get those things right. And there is no like right or wrong answer here, right? But how you get those things right, and or strategies that you've used in the past in kind of your public or private life around decisions that you've made that have helped to make evidence-based and merit-based decisions within a really emotionally charged environment. So let's start with what strategies have you used before in your personal or professional life that have helped you make tough decisions in a context that's pretty emotionally charged? Anybody can jump in on that question.
So this is Eddie Smith. I'll go first. Having served as a state rep where we had to deal with both charter schools as well as vouchers and other things, it really boiled down to looking at the facts and the evidence before you. You have to kind of put all of the emotion on a shelf and look at what is the data saying that we have to make a decision on. And that's where most of my focus will continue to be, is just looking at the data and, you know, what's the evidence tell us to help make a decision moving forward.
Thank you. What else? How's please go, Wendy.
This is Wendy. I mean, you know, having done these, it's easier for me to look back at how we did these, and our staff was great at providing us data. But for me, it was just sort of looking at the data, but also looking at where the data came from and the quality of the data, not from the staff, because that quality was, in my opinion, always high. But a lot of the stuff that came in from the people who had, you know, had their own goals in mind, and you'd have to look and see what that, particularly I would say around the negative fiscal impact arguments. You know, you'd get a lot. The staff would get a lot of data. They would provide it to all of us, and just looking at where it came from and how reliable it was really important. And I second what Eddie said. You know, I'm sure as a state rep, he got a lot of grief. I got as a mayor's education advisor, and then on the state board, I was Twitter attacked. I was the subject of, you know, like blogs I didn't even know existed. And you really just have to, you just can't care about that. You have to just have thick skin and focus on what's best for kids, and not, you know, not be paying attention to what crazy people are doing.
Thanks. Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
From my time on the Tennessee Board of Regents, most people saw the Regents meeting in quarterly, And we'd sit there and motions made, and there's not a lot of discussion. Because there was not this realization that a lot of the work had gone on before in committee meetings, in what I'll call an agenda session that we had, and a lot of working, to Wendy's point, that staff was bringing in. And so it's really being smart so people recognize that you're not just sitting there in this public meeting making this decision, and it seems like you're not saying anything or engaged. And so being conscious of the fact that not everybody is aware of what goes into a process before you make a decision, yes or no. And I think it's important to keep that in mind and find the opportunities and way for people who and particularly those who are going to be opposed to it, to realize there's a lot of work that went into this, and there's a lot of invested time by members of the commission, or in that case, the Board of Regents, before we got to decisions.
I think that's really useful advice, Mr. Chairman, and it resonates with my experience. So when I was a staff member doing authorizing work, it was with the Indianapolis Mayor's Office. So I worked for 2 mayors of Indianapolis of different political parties, and we were very concerned that folks would see our decisions as being backroom decisions made for the mayor's political friends. And so we emphasize the transparency part of the quality decision-making process to the nth degree, where, to your point, Mr. Chairman, we made all of our decision-making processes as public and transparent as possible, so that everybody knew. Nobody could, if you questioned the decision, you had to question it on grounds that weren't process or weren't the kinds of work that went into making said decision. Because we always want to take off the table that this was a process that was not done with a great amount of time, thoughtfulness, and depth. And nobody could question that because we made, so I just echo the importance of transparency in taking at least that argument off the table. What else? I mean, I was reading your bios and backgrounds, other commissioners. Y'all have been in situations where this has been hard, making these kind of decisions. What other advice do you have for other fellow commissioners about how to make quality decisions in kind of a charged environment?
Yeah, this is Terrence. I think, making sure we keep our North Star always in mind. So whatever our vision is for the organization and how we want to serve children, I think will make these decisions easier. Certainly we'll have the noise that folks have made reference to, but I think having a very clear mission and North Star, or very clear vision and North Star, I think will really help us in making solid decisions.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share some of your learned experiences here? Okay. Well, no doubt y'all will continue to get to know each other and kind of live from each other's experiences. I'll share with you just 2 thoughts on kind of these elements of making a quality decision for you to keep in mind from my own experiences being in your shoes. One is the persuasive power of stories of fairness. When you are making these decisions, stories, especially from students or families, can be really emotional and really powerful, and can influence the record that staff are generating for you. I would caution you to be careful about single powerful stories. There is absolutely no doubt that some applications, even some schools, are working well for some kids. Your responsibility is also to look out for kids for whom the school is not working for, or maybe not, if it's a new school application, that's coming to you. Be mindful of powerful individual or small group stories that may influence kind of thinking on the totality of the evidence. And the second is empower your staff to make sure that they are giving you all the information you need in these areas to make a high quality decision. They are your most important element in getting the information you need, whether it is the right kinds of facts and evidence and where the data are coming from, and making the process public. Right, your staff are the ones that are really important in executing on those areas. All right, I'm going. If there aren't any other questions, because in this section, what we were trying to do is just to dig in a little bit around some of the pressures that you're going to feel in quality decision making, and some initial thinking around ways in which you're able to still make the right high quality decisions within a kind of a charge context. Any other thoughts or comments that folks may want to offer for the good of the group at this point? Okay, hearing none, we can move to the next slide there, Aaron. In the spirit of, I had a boss that said, actually one of the former mayors that said, you gotta have a steel spine to make these kind of decisions in this kind of space. And so we will offer you with just some thoughts where if you are the authorizer, you have to close a school, or you're in a place where an application doesn't quite meet the standard based on the information you get from staff, is that this is hard, and it should be hard because the decisions you're making aren't just for the kids that you're thinking about right now, but you have to also think about kids that are going to come in the next generation of schools. And we owe it to all of the kids that we are trusted to serve, that the schools that they are offered are great for them and their community. So I think at this point, you can keep going, Aaron. I think at this point, we are going to take a short break, I believe is our next thing on the agenda. By my time, we are 10:12 Central. So can we, if it's okay with the chairman, if we can reconvene to say 12 or 10:18 or so. We're going to be real specific here because we got every minute that we need to fill to get stuff done here. Mr. Chairman, is it okay to take a minute break for folks?
Absolutely. Thank you. We'll be back in 5.
Thank you. It's oh, you, Mr. Chairman. I'm an old high school teacher, and so I believe in starting on time and ending on time, and keeping breaks to what we said they were going to be. So, if okay with you, we can go ahead and get back started.
No, I'm good. My Mickey Mouse watch, which is the face on it, says it is my time, 11:18, 10:18 your time. Let's go. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for commissioners for hopefully a useful conversation and some information for you. We're now going to transition into some of the more technical elements of authorizing, including some of the things that staff are going to be responsible for and that you should make sure that they're empowered to do. So I'm going to turn this now over to Erin, who's going to lead us through as she is kind of dialing back in. One of the things that as she is getting back with us is a lot of things you're going to see here will be things that it's important for you to know that staff is doing and doing well so that you can have great assurance of the information that you're going to get in making the kind of decisions that you'll it's oh, you, Mr. Chairman, I'm an old high school teacher, and so I believe in starting on time and ending on time, and keeping breaks to what we said they were going to be. So if okay with you, we can go ahead and get back started.
No, I'm good. My Mickey Mouse watch, which is the face on it, says it is my time, 11:18, 10:18 your time. Let's go. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for commissioners for, hopefully a useful conversation and some information for you. We're now going to transition into some of the more technical elements of authorizing, including some of the things that staff are going to be responsible for and that you should make sure that they're empowered to do. So I'm going to turn this now over to Erin, who's going to lead us through as she is kind of dialing back in. One of the things that as she is getting back with us is a lot of things you're going to see here will be things that it's important for you to know that staff is doing and doing well, so that you can have great assurance of the information that you're going to get in making the kind of decisions that you'll be required to make. So we can go to the next slide. We're going to focus on, when you're available and ready. Erin, are you good?
Yeah, sorry about that. I just got cut off from my audio, so I should be back in business.
Great. We'll let you roll with us now. Thanks, Erin.
No problem. Hello to everyone. So for the next part of our training, we are going to shift the focus a bit and turn that focus more toward the technical and practice-based aspects of authorizing work. And we'll start with the charter school application appeal process. And I will say that we'll move through this section with a bit of a clip, and we're going to treat this as more of kind of a broad survey of all of these practice areas. And I'll say that if we're finding you'd like to dig in on certain aspects of these practices, do feel free to stop me. And we can also, think about subsequent trainings with you all as you continue to onboard and train, again, to dig in deeper. But without further ado, we will start with your application appeal work. So referencing Kariga's great discussion, about your roles, as we look at, the specific process around your application appeal work, what are your key roles? What will they be? So your role as a commissioner will involve two key things. You will receive critically important information from staff to aid in the decision-making process. And that will typically include things like the charter school application packet, the scoring rubric that staff use to assess that application, and then most importantly, as Kariga mentioned, a recommendation from staff that includes evidence. So second, and more on the decision-making side, you have a very clear and important standard of review, which we talked about a little bit earlier in the training. So you will be overturning appeals that meet or exceed the department scoring rubric and that are deemed in the best interest of students, the LEA, and then the community. So you can see the graphic on the right here that illustrates the major authorizing practice areas. And so these are the same areas, as Kariga mentioned, that are outlined by the Tennessee Quality Authorizing Standards that I believe were adopted a couple years ago, that also conveniently mirror the major parts of the charter school life cycle. So the application appeal process is likely an area where you will be fairly active from the beginning. So hopefully this flow chart feels familiar to you from back in January. I believe Tess first gave you a rundown of the different pathways to appeal for how a school could reach the commission. So we'll treat this as a bit of a quick refresher. So within this 75-day process, there are 4 major parts, which you can see here on the graphic. First, the commission will receive the appeal, and that will come days after the board's decision. You'll then hold an open meeting, and that meeting needs to occur in the LEA in which the proposed school submitted the application. Third, you'll be conducting a de novo review. And then finally, the commission or the local board can authorize based on that decision. So the parts that we will be focusing on in this training here today is really going to be centered around how to conduct a quality de novo review. And then we'll also circle back to your standard of review, which you can see here in the bottom box on the screen. So in thinking about a quality de novo review, what are the core elements of this process? So we've illustrated all of the different moving parts here. And you can see starting in the upper left, it typically begins with a charter school application. The process will also involve interviews and ultimately ends with recommendation decisions. So to be clear, staff will be leading and managing the vast majority of the process that you see here on the screen. But there are 2 particular parts where you will be intimately involved as commissioners. So you can see here, you'll be most involved with open meetings, of course, as we discussed with Kariga, and then ultimately that authorization decision. So we're going to go through each step of this de novo review process because we felt in preparing for this training that it's really important for you all to know as commissioners what steps staff should be taking behind the scenes and really what quality works like in each part of this process. So starting with the application.
Hey, Erin.
Yes.
This is Eddie Smith. I want to go back just one slide because I want to get a little bit of clarification. When we met back in February on that open meetings in the district where an appeal is happening, while we can attend, we're not actively engaged in that because we're just there to review and listen to things that are going on. All our staff would actually be conducting that open meeting, correct?
I believe so. In talking with Tess, I believe that staff will be responsible for the logistics and the organization of that meeting. So yes, they will be taking the lion's share of responsibility there. And we'll talk a little bit about the open meeting and how that relates to your role in a couple of slides. But ultimately, you will want to stay connected to the information that comes from that meeting in order to be, keeping the pulse on the community, what's going on in your landscape in terms of politics and community emotion about the school. So yes, thank you for that clarification, and we will dig in on that a little bit more. Any other questions about the process that we've laid out here? Okay. So thinking about the charter school application. So as some of you might know, the application tends to be a very lengthy document, and it essentially constitutes 3 things. There's an education plan, an operations plan, and then a financial plan. So we're going to talk a little bit about what goes into each of these plans. And again, staff will be reviewing these documents, but you should know what they should be looking for. So we'll start with the education program, which really tends to be the centerpiece of most applications. So critical things here, staff are looking for a clear educational philosophy of the school, as well as the methodologies they're planning to use. Paired with that, they also will be assessing how the school will measure the success of its program, and also how it will hold itself accountable for measuring student performance. So generally, this part of the application should be very detailed, and staff will be reviewing and evaluating a multitude of things that are laid out in the department's model charter school application. So some things that they'll be looking at will be, evaluating graduation requirements. They'll also be digging into school culture. And they'll also be assessing instructional approaches for special populations and also at-risk students, and then digging into student discipline policies as well. And then it's my general understanding that the department will likely update their application next year, so when you are coming on board. But my understanding is that it won't look or feel much different, and all of these essential elements will essentially remain in place. So the operations plan is broadly focused on a school's legal status as well as its governance structure. So staff will be looking for quality here in terms of how the governing board of the proposed school is structured, as well as any staffing plans and facilities management, among other things. Okay. So moving on to our financial plan. The financial plan is primarily focused on two things. There's the financial plan itself, but there's also management capacity. So here, staff will not only be evaluating the fidelity of things like budget projections over the life of the charter, but they'll also be assessing the people. So they'll be looking for the qualifications of the applicant team to really manage the financial health of the school. So during the de novo review process, internal staff will not necessarily be reviewing these appeals alone. It is best practice for authorizing staff to partner with an external evaluator for a number of reasons. And we feel that they provide a sense of objectivity, of expertise, they provide feedback, and also a level of integrity to the review process itself. So I will say that evaluation teams can certainly vary in size. And authorizers, we've come to learn, typically bring in anywhere from 1 to 3 external evaluators with various levels of expertise. And really, they do that as a way to fill knowledge gaps across the team. And so to be clear, an evaluator or an external evaluator certainly can be someone like a consultant, but that doesn't always have to be the case. So these folks can be, for example, experts in and across different offices within the department, for example. So working with folks who perhaps are in the special education office and having them review certain aspects of the application. So all that to say, authorizers really get creative about where they're drawing on expertise in terms of their own capacity. So what are evaluators actually using to assess the charter school application? Again, as part of your de novo review, that means you essentially have to re-review the application. So the primary piece, or really the primary tool staff will use, is this application scoring rubric here. This is provided by the department. So we wanted to draw your attention to the importance of this particular document, as it really will become kind of a holy grail or a centerpiece for staff as they move through the de novo review process. And just to circle back to one of the prongs of your standard of review for applications on appeal is, does that application meet or exceed the metrics in this scoring rubric here? So all that to say, this rubric will really help staff generate those evidence-based recommendations to help answer that question. So what should staff be looking for in the overall quality? So we talked about some of the more technical aspects of the ED program, the org plan, as well as the finances, but really as a whole, how should they be looking at this document? So a couple of things. First, they are looking for internal alignment. So they're asking questions like, are all of the elements connected, and do they really work together? Are they talking together? So by way of example, does the budget align with their projections and their staffing plan? So really trying to thread that needle across all of these elements. Second, they are also looking for external validation. So are the instructional approaches that the school is proposing, are they actually based on research? Have this applicant team really seen positive results with the educational approach that they're proposing for students? And then finally, they're really looking for enough detail. So we consider a charter school application to be very much a professional document, and that should reflect the thoughtfulness as well as the capacity of the applicant team. So moving on to due diligence, and Kariga touched on this a little bit, and this came up in conversations around maybe some on and off the record interactions for schools reaching out to commissioners. So to tie us back to this concept of due diligence, this is typically treated as a part of the de novo review process. And it can look and feel a little bit different depending on the needs of staff at the time. But in general, what staff are doing is they're verifying information and sometimes trying to gather additional evidence. And we generally refer to this as due diligence. So again, to be clear, this set of activities will be staff's responsibility, where they'll be behind the scenes really running down information. And this process can look formal or sometimes more informal in nature. So to give you an example of what this might look and feel like is that, for example, if an applicant operates schools in other states outside of the state of Tennessee, staff have sometimes found it helpful to have a simple phone call with another authorizer in the state that does oversee those schools, where they can talk through and verify things like academic performance. So again, just for you all to be aware of that this is a staff-driven function. And again, any information collected will be treated as a formal part of the process and a formal piece of evidence for your review. Okay, so to quickly orient you all where we are in the process, we're about halfway through and moving on to the capacity interview process. And before we move on, are there any questions on the process so far? Okay. So in thinking about capacity interviews, this is really the time where staff will meet in person with the applicant team. So it's really important that staff not only evaluate the paper application, but they're evaluating the people as well. So in-person interviews will help staff with 4 primary. And this in-person time will be used to vet the education program. They'll use it to probe and to make sure all of the plans are truly cohesive. They'll follow up on areas of clarification and to also reevaluate opinions and also observations based on how the interview goes. So overall, the capacity interview is named for just that reason. Staff are trying to assess the expertise, the motivation, and just the overall professionalism of the applicant team to carry out their plans with fidelity. Again, just to be clear, commissioners typically do not attend these interviews, and this will be a staff-driven function. So circling back to open meetings. We can explore some best practices here, as well as some requirements that are outlined for you all in your law. So the commission must hold an open meeting as part of the de novo review process. But as we mentioned, and to Mr. Smith's earlier question, staff will be primarily responsible for both the logistics and the organization of this event. The basic layout is composed of 5 major parts, as you can see here on the graphic. And as we mentioned, this meeting must be held in the LEA where the application was submitted. Again, this is an important part of the decision-making process because it will help staff to potentially get a sense of that potential impact of the charter on the community. So again, we can tie this back to your standard of review, which charges you with determining if the application is in the best interest of, or if it will have a negative fiscal impact on the students and the LEA and the community. So you will receive recommendations from staff on whether to uphold or to overturn a local district's decision. The recommendation you receive should consider all information. So what that means is it needs to be informed by multiple sources, which typically include the application, of course, as we mentioned, but it also needs to include information gleaned from those in-person interviews, information from the public hearing or that open meeting, and then any other additional due diligence that staff conducted. So the recommendations themselves should be aligned and clear, and again, supported by robust evidence. And in terms of the deliverable itself, you'll typically receive a recommendation, which again can take the form of a memo or perhaps a report or even a presentation. We've seen staff approach this many different ways depending on how the commission functions, along with an application packet and then those underlying scoring rubrics from staff. So moving on to our final step here. So we've arrived at the authorization decision. So when it comes to the final decision-making process, that recommendation plays a pretty particular role. And so if you look on the left, There are some things that it can do, which is, of course, provide you with a recommendation on whether to approve or overturn. And it should also provide you with an analysis of strengths and concerns that staff has identified. And then looking to the right, there are some things that it does not contain, and that is a decision. And this is where your professional discretion and judgment are truly coming into play in helping you decipher the elements of your standard of review. So why are quality decisions for new schools so important? We think the answer to that question is very much related to school closure. And so this is a particular topic that NACS has become very interested in, and our own analysis has revealed, I would say, generally 4 broad reasons for first-year closures. So you can see here, they range from things like low enrollment, to facilities challenges, to things like improper operational policies. So again, staff's rigorous reviews and your rigorous decision-making will ensure that only schools that are set up for success will eventually open.
Aaron, okay, if I just one thing real quick on this section, just to underscore, commissioners and staff, you do not want first-year closures to happen. It is perhaps more damaging than if a school never opened for kids and families and communities. It's one of the really important reasons as to why decisions that you make to make a different merit-based decision than someone else has made, and you get something on appeal, becomes really important that you have great confidence that it's a high-quality decision that you're making. We have seen this happen in some communities where it is devastating for kids and families that were excited about this new option. They enrolled and it closes mid-year. At the end of that year, they got to find something else. It can do a lot of damage. So be mindful of that. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Kriya. What questions can we answer about the de novo review process? It's quite extensive, and there's many different pieces of your standard of review for this particular appeal pathway. So wanted to check in and see if there are any questions before we move on.
I've got 3 quick ones. Everything that you've laid out, every document being created is a public document, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just thought that's important for all of us to remember that. Number 2, at the public meeting, is it expected by those who would be in attendance in the audience that a commissioner or several commissioners might at least be there, not running it, but be in attendance? Is that sort of somewhat expected?
Yeah, I think this can be approached in a couple of different ways, and it might be helpful for maybe Tess or Amity to share how the board has approached. I'd be interested to hear kind of locally how you've approached that.
I'll defer to Tess.
Sure. So the state board, as a part of communicating to the state board of members about appeals, is that we notify state board members of the time and location of the public hearings and ask that they let us know if they do plan to attend. That's so that we can make sure that we would adhere to any open meetings requirements and make sure members attending that we encourage them, obviously, not to be communicating about the appeal and to really be only there listening. I would say the vast majority of our members utilize the recording that we provide to members as a part of the record to engage with what was discussed at the public hearing as opposed to attending it, but certainly we have had members attend in the past.
Okay, no, thank you. I'd like to just park that for right now, just because part of it is a perception type question. So thank you for that answer. And the last one is, give me a sense of the process you just walked us through. What's the timeline? Meaning, is it weeks, months, just to get a feel for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Tess, jump in if I'm incorrect, but I believe your timeline is driven by statute, where it's a 75-day process, and I believe the clock would start upon submission of the appeal, and you would then have 75 days to issue a decision on that appeal. But Tess, jump in if I have misstated that.
That is correct. And so typically how the state board has run it is that we would be looking to schedule the public hearing kind of halfway through that 75 days, or in the board's case, it's 60 days, so that the staff would have had an opportunity to review the application or review the materials in the appeal in order to develop appropriate questions or areas that we needed to gather additional information. But yes, all of those pieces of the puzzle that Aaron has been laying out would have to happen within 75 days, including the commission's decision.
Thank you. Other commissioners have questions, please bring them up. I would think, Aaron, that we're ready to proceed. If you're still
Very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, so we have a couple more practice areas to review with you all. So our next section here is going to cover two related areas, and that would be performance contracting and then ongoing evaluation. So as you can see, we're moving through our pie chart here and kind of moving through our charter school life cycle, and we've come to performance contracting. So what are your key roles here? Two main duties that you all need to know. First, you'll be executing charter contracts with the school's governing board. Negotiations tend to happen via staff, so just so you're aware of that piece of the contracting process. But this is a really critical piece in establishing expectations at the start of your relationship with a school. And this is relevant for both your role as an authorizer on appeal, but also as a kind of a regular authorizer. So again, the charter contract is where the school's performance expectations are laid out. Second duty, you have the role to really assure a mutual understanding and acceptance of the performance expectations for all parties involved. As commissioners, you need to understand the different goals the school has set and have a general understanding of what they need to be doing over the course of their charter term to be meeting those goals. So related, once that contract is signed, monitoring of schools truly begins. So staff will be leading the vast majority of this work, but as commissioners, you have two duties or responsibilities here. First, you can be expecting to receive an annual school performance report. So you are aware of how schools are performing over the course of the term. And then second, you'll be involved in articulating and then potentially enforcing consequences. So staff will notify when schools are not meeting certain expectations in their contracts. And as commissioners, you may need to step in to enforce certain consequences. And in this case, that could be things like very serious issues like a revocation of the charter, if there's gross financial fraud or mismanagement, health and safety issues. So we'll talk more about those details in a couple of slides, but those are the two key areas in which you'll be taking on responsibility for monitoring and evaluation. So staff will be working really hard throughout the year to track performance expectations of schools. So you can see here our trusted image of our charter school life cycle, and all of the monitoring and the potential intervention essentially happen over the course of, in Tennessee, it's a 10-year charter term. So you can see at the bottom here, we have monitoring performance and then intervening, which essentially is sandwiched between signing your contract and then deciding renewal. So it's essentially what's happening in all the in-between time as school years pass by, as school days start and end. It's really that in-between time. So the performance framework, just wanted to call your attention to this piece, which is typically included as part of the charter contract, will be staff's centerpiece in guiding this monitoring work. It'll also guide interventions and let people, and let staff know when interventions will become necessary with schools. So we mentioned the performance framework. More broadly, the performance framework essentially helps staff to answer three main questions over the course of a charter term. So it's a tool that contains metrics and measures that help determine, one, if the education program is successful, two, if the school is financially sound, and then three, if the school's organization is effective and also well run. And it's my understanding that the state board does have a performance framework, which I think is fairly close to the model framework. And I believe as commissioners, you'll need to potentially renegotiate with schools and to see if they will use the state board's performance framework or if they'll be changing it with their schools. Tess, do you want to provide any color on that particular piece with the performance framework?
Yes, so currently the state board does have a performance framework. One of the things that your staff will do is that when they're negotiating contracts that will transfer over to the commission is a decision of if the commission would like to amend the performance framework that's been adopted by the state board, be negotiating with the schools regarding any changes that you all would like to make to that.
Great, thank you, Tess. So what exactly will staff be measuring throughout the course of the charter term? So they'll be looking at three main areas, which should look pretty familiar because they align with the elements of the performance framework, which we just talked about. So they'll be looking at academic measures, organizational measures, and then financial measures. Again, all aligned with that performance framework. For academic performance in particular, they'll look at things like student growth, proficiency rates, and then state and federal accountability measures as well. For organizational performance, folks tend to focus on governance practices and reporting, but they'll also be looking a little bit more broadly. So they'll look at school culture and also the environment of the school over the years. Staff will also be tracking a variety of financial measures that tend to include both near-term and sustainability measures as well. You may be wondering, how are they going to collect all of this information? So there are a variety of tools that staff have at their disposal to track school performance. And you can see we have 5 different tools featured here. So we have first on the left, pre-opening. So this is the time between when you approve an application and when the school actually opens its doors. So in the case of New Start appeals, for example, staff will be working typically very closely with school leadership in anywhere from 9 months to a year period, kind of that startup phase, sometimes referred to as a year 0 for a school, to make sure that those schools are set up for success to open. The next 2 tools, reporting timelines and desk audits. So this is generally information schools are required to submit to authorizing staff. So that typically includes things like board meeting minutes and discipline policies as well. And I think an important thing to distinguish here is that schools should not just be emailing or submitting these documents on some platform and they just sit and gather dust. Staff should be engaging with and analyzing this information. Site visits. So staff will be visiting schools on site. This typically happens once a year, and it's a chance for staff to really see what's happening on the ground. Again, these visits are grounded in the measures of the performance framework, so both school and staff should be aware of what the visit should entail. And finally, we have our last tool on the right here, and this is the annual report. So this is essentially a summary of performance over the course of the school year. And this is a really helpful report that helps the school and also the community and you as a commissioner to understand where the school stands in terms of performance. And to the chair's question about public documents, it's typically best practice for an authorizer to publish those annual reports, again, as a nod to transparency and a way for both staff, commissioners, and the public to have a really clear sense of how the schools are performing. So what kinds of performance information will you actually receive from staff? We've spent a lot of time talking about all of the different activities happening behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, you'll typically receive kind of 2 categories of information. The first is what we would refer to as a notice of concern. Some people refer to it as an intervention notice, but the basic idea behind this communication is that it will let you know when a school is not meeting the terms of its contract. So this notice can really range in terms of severity, and it can maybe more minor, like a financial dip, to things that are much more serious in nature, like health and safety violations. So again, you'll receive a lot of guidance from staff in terms of how and why this notice of concern was issued and how the school might be expected to remedy those concerns. Second, you'll receive the annual performance report. So as we just talked about, this has typically been a written summary with sometimes a public presentation. I think that's how the state board has handled this particular piece in the past. And again, annual reporting has come to be a really essential authorizing practice, and it's important for a couple of reasons. First, and I think most importantly, it lets a school know how it's doing and keeps expectations transparent. And by making them publicly available, they're transparent to the public, And then third, it helps the school to identify its own strengths and areas for improvement, with the important caveat that the report does not necessarily prescribe the solutions for the school, but just notifies the school of what they need to do to improve. So that was a really quick run through of the overall monitoring and evaluation work that will be happening throughout the charter term. Again, happy to follow up and dig in on any of these pieces, but wanted to do a quick check to see if there are any questions we can answer here. Okay. I think in the interest of time, we will continue on to our last practice area. So we're going to cover both renewal and revocation in your typical authorizing role, but then we will also cover renewal and revocation on appeal. So this would be in your authorizer as appeal role. So we'll quickly refresh on this particular graphic that Kariga opened us up with this morning. So as commissioners, again, you have that dual role to play here. So you'll be hearing appeals for both renewals and revocations. And then you'll also be taking on that traditional authorizer role by deciding on renewals and revocations for any schools that you oversee throughout the appeal process. So some of these things could be happening in tandem and perhaps are kind of in parallel as you're going through your authorizing role. So it's really important for us to try to distinguish for you here kind of the different prongs that each of these entails. So you'll have three main roles when it comes to this particular practice area. Typical and related to other things we've mentioned in the training today, you'll receive a recommendation. This will come from staff, and you'll receive both renewal and revocation recommendations. So you also have the role and duty to revoke a charter. If there is evidence of extreme underperformance, or if there is violation of law. So as we've mentioned, things like a violation of health and safety of students. And that responsibility comes straight from the Tennessee Quality Authorizing Standards. So in terms of renewal, it is your role to grant renewal only to schools that are meeting the performance expectations that are laid out in their contract. So in general, the Tennessee Quality Authorizing Standards really provide some great guidance to help you ground your decision-making over the years. So I'd really encourage you all to engage with that document and return to that document to return to those basic decision-making principles. So there's a lot to consider here, and we're going to try to distinguish the renewal process from the revocation process, the authorizing process from the appeal process. So if you kind of buckle up and bear with me here, we'll get through this last section, and I hope a way that will be helpful just to help frame your thinking about each of these processes. All right, so we're first going to shift to your role as authorizer, and we'll talk a little bit about renewal best practices. So staff, again, will be taking the lead on managing the renewal process with schools. So they'll be reviewing that renewal application. They will be providing schools with that performance report that we talked about. And we're noting here that the department a renewal application template for schools to use in this process. So you can see that picture here on the right. So there should generally be a consistency of format and information coming in for renewal. So the renewal process follows 4 basic steps. As you can see pictured here, these steps are dictated by statute, and they typically start the year prior to a charter school's contract expiration. So it's intended to be more front-loaded to give schools and really communities, parents, time to prepare in the event of a potential closure. Staff will first start this process by compiling school performance reports and first providing those to schools. So this is typically happening about 3 months prior to the application deadline, which by Tennessee statute, that is April 1st. So really starting to get the process going in spring. Staff will then generate evidence-based recommendations to commissioners for you to consider. And statute dictates that you'll need to wrap up your renewal decision by February 1st at the latest. Okay, we have another kind of way flow chart here. So this is a quick refresher as well. So this follows the appeal process for renewal. So we're just pivoting quickly back to your role as an appellate authorizer. So this process has 3 basic steps. First, the schools will have 10 days to appeal a renewal decision to the commission. And in this particular case, the law doesn't require a de novo review, but staff can lean on some of the general best practices and approaches that we covered earlier in the training to still rigorously evaluate the renewal application. They're going to be looking at the rubric. They may be conducting some due diligence as well. So again, you're ultimately leaning on your professional and your discretion when determining if that renewal decision is in the best interest of students. Okay, so we're going to shift to our last topic here. So we're going to talk about revocation and revocation on. And what I would love to just get a quick sense of, and this is really to kind of ground folks in the broader landscape of school closure. And I'm wondering if folks have a sense of, when do most closures actually occur? They occur during the renewal process, so every 10 years. Are they happening outside of the renewal process? So that would perhaps be a sudden school closure, maybe a closure in the middle of a school year. If folks could just take a quick minute and type in either A or B, and we'll talk about the answer in just a minute. All right, seeing some answers come through. Like a lot of people are leaning on Wendy here. Okay, interesting. It's looking like maybe a general consensus around B, so closures for outside of the renewal process with a couple of A's. So really interesting. Thanks for taking our poll there. So the answer to this question is that most school closures actually do occur during the renewal process. So you can see here on the graph, we have the closure rate, which is on the y-axis, and then we have years spanning the x-axis. And NACSA was really interested in this particular topic and initiated a little bit of research in this area. And our data revealed that most school closures, again, do occur during the renewal process. And you can see the closure rate reflected in that top blue line toward the top of the graph. And we wanted to highlight this data for you to give you just some general context around when revocation activity may or may not be happening during the charter term. And you can also see the red line toward the bottom of the graph. And this is showing that it's less common for an authorizer to revoke a charter during the middle of a term. And I think there's a lot of things you could think about why that might be. But you might even conjecture that, you know, some of these revocations mid-year may be occurring for things like financial fraud, serious financial failure or mismanagement, or again, major violations of health, safety, or even legal issues. So in your role as authorizer on appeal, you have to follow a process via statute, and this process lasts 60 days. So a little bit more truncated and shorter than your New Start application appeal obligations. So this flowchart follows that appeal process. And in contrast to the other appeal pathways that we covered, you can see on the right that the commission does not become the authorizer if it overturns a local decision. It does indeed call for a de novo review. Reviewing the original district's revocation decision, I think, to provide some needed due process for schools. So again, this is a similar aspect to your appeal process for your New Start appeals. Staff, again, can lean on many of those elements of the quality review we discussed. And again, using external experts, conducting due diligence, all apply here as well. And finally, your standard of review is if it's contrary to a set of legal criteria, which we will very quickly review as we wrap up our training. So what is the criteria for your standard of review for revocation? And this actually is relevant for both your role as an authorizer and then also to your role as an authorizer on appeal. So what are you looking for? There's basically three specific circumstances. So first, if the school committed a material violation of their charter agreement, also referred to as charter contract. Second, if the school failed to make or meet sufficient progress toward those goals laid out in the contract. And then finally, if it failed to meet generally accepted standards of financial management. So I wanted to tie this briefly back to Kariga's discussion on decision making. So navigating all these criteria will again take your professional judgment and your discretion. And as you're making these hard decisions, you know, keep in mind that staff can and should be providing you with solid information and recommendations to aid you in this process. And if you recall, you know, things like regular intervention notices will help you track material violations. You'll be digesting annual performance reports along the way. So you really do have the tools, the resources, and eventually you will have the staff to lean on to truly aid you in this decision making to make sure it's rigorous and evidence-based. So just wanted to circle back to that and remind you that you will have resources to help you make good decisions. All right, so To close out our training for today, wanted to quickly bring us back to the why of this work. As you prepare for your new roles at the start of next year, we hope you'll stay grounded in these basic principles that Kariga introduced at the top of our training. Because remember, when decisions get tough, which they will, your role is to do good work for kids. So this means maintaining those high standards when districts don't. It means upholding the freedoms and flexibilities that charter schools are afforded. And ultimately, it means protecting the interests of students and also the public. So you have a really exciting opportunity ahead of you to improve educational outcomes for students across Tennessee. So with that, I'll first extend a huge thank you on behalf of NACSA and myself and Kariga personally. We will be following up with you with a brief electronic survey. We're always looking for ways to improve our training and our programming, especially in light of kind of our virtual push for instruction via our new life under COVID. So be on the lookout for a brief survey. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, that concludes our content, but wanted to open it up for any questions for either myself on practice or for Kariga on any decision-making questions.
Dr. Roush and Ms. Marwa, let me thank you all for the information this morning. It was a lot, you're right. And I'm sure you all will be available and we can work through Amity and the staff if there's other questions we may have that will help us as we go forward. But as a commission that is meeting for the second time as a group, and I'll speak for myself here, learning all of the intricate details here and a lot of the evaluation and the process and that interaction with both staff and public is important to have. So really appreciate the background you all have, the support you're giving to us. And I would expect that this is only the beginning of the interaction that we will want to have going forward.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're invested in you and the work of this commission that it will do on behalf of kids and families. So yes, please call on us in ways that we can be helpful. One just last thing before you transition, sir, is you mentioned earlier around the importance of transparency, Mr. Chairman, and I wanted to underscore the importance of that. As you all are developing systems and all the information we just provided, as you said, Mr. Chairman, it's a lot. What becomes really important is that you also make sure that the public has confidence in the process and develop all of these things, make them public and remind people, right, of the rigor in which you and your staff are going through with this. It'll be really important building confidence and call on us to the degree that we can be helpful to you in the important work that you all are doing.
Thank you for adding that great advice to us. Let me just stop for a second before you all leave us and we finish out our agenda and ask other commissioners if you have questions. Now is the time to please ask them before we finish this session. I don't see anything at this point. Again, thank you all for the time today. Thank you for presenting it to us in the format that we're receiving it. It went well. And many of us, myself very much so, are learning how to steer through, this type of a way of communicating. I find it kind of interesting. But it also, I think, really helps people get focused because it takes out a lot of distractions that otherwise might be there when you present something. So again, thank you all. We wish you the best, and we look forward to working with you going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much.
So commissioners, we're ready to move on with the agenda if you all are. We're going to now move into the action items. We have 2 today. So we have several rules and policies that are on the agenda. And let me thank the committees for working during this period of time and getting this ready and to keep us on track. During the Rules and Policy Committee, there was a question about deadline for appeal applications. I'd like to ask Chanel to walk us through where she landed on putting together the blanks we have and the background.
Absolutely. So during our committee meeting on the rules and policies regarding appeals applications and when to submit them, we had some extended discussion about how we want to handle the deadline to submit the materials. So one suggestion was made that maybe we have a sort of submission deadline and then still allow time for staff to review the materials that have been submitted as part of their appeals package and be able to communicate with them if they've missed something. Ultimately, my suggestion, I went back and I thought through it. My suggestion would be to, since that's not really required under the statute, my suggestion would be to not put that kind in the rule. I can just anticipate that we're taking on this sort of role to say that we're actively looking, but the staff rather is actively looking at the applications as they come in. And if somebody misses something, I can see that being an area of potential litigation, and it's something that is not required under statute. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that, but that was where I landed. And then I also thought about the kind of counseling that we would want to do for staff when they're reviewing these applications as they're coming in. Certainly, I think it would be permissible for someone to write back and say, hey, you said you attached 3 items and I only see 2. But then it gets kind of dicey as the level that staff would be interacting on the application phase if they're saying, if it gets a little bit substantive, just because under the statute, as we've just heard in the presentation, the ultimate decision is with the commissioners. And so if someone looks at it and feels that a staff member has made a sort of determination regarding their appeal, I could see that being a potential area of litigation as well. And so that's why I came down to just having that 11:59 p.m. deadline on the 10th calendar day after the decision is made, and you'll see that reflected in the New Start appeals rule, the renewal appeals rule, and the revocation appeals rule. And I'm certainly open to hearing y'all's discussion and what your thoughts are regarding that, but that was where I landed.
Janelle, thank
Chair,
you.
may I? Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me ask Commissioner Patterson, who heads this committee, if Terrence has any comments that he would like to share before we move to other members of that committee. So Terrence, is there something you would like to share?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to note that we had a very robust conversation on the policy committee, and the feeling was we wanted to make sure that we did not constrict any of the existing laws or regulations that were put to us, and to also make sure that we were sort of as liberal as possible in terms of allowing the public and charter schools the opportunity to appeal and bring information to our staff. While I think we realize it would put a bit of a burden on staff, we still believe, and I believe, that we should allow as much leeway as possible for the public to submit information, and we should not constrict those regulations or guidelines. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other commissioner have a comment on what Chanel laid out?
Mr. Chair, this is Wendy. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So the conversation that we had was because the board, the state board currently has a deadline earlier in the day, and I don't remember what time it is, and it doesn't really matter. And the Terrence expressed the concern that that would limit the time frame for applying, and we wanted to keep the time frame to the max. And Chanel had an obvious legal concern that we had to meet the statutory guideline. And so the suggestion was to split that down the middle and have that earlier time with the understanding that there would be an opportunity of back and forth for the applicants to get everything in by midnight if they missed anything. And that was my suggestion. And I get why we're not, Chanel, I get why you're hesitant to do that, but I just want to get clarity for myself. The way this rule as it's proposed now, applicants would have until 11:59 p.m. on that deadline date. And if they didn't cross every T and dot every I, then by law, we cannot consider their application that year, right? So that's the piece, and we may not be able to, but I just want to make sure if they leave a piece out that's statutory required, then we cannot by law even consider them, right?
That's my interpretation of the statute, and I believe that during our committee meeting, I believe that's how the state board has been handling it as well. So under the statute, it says that you can submit it no later than 10 days after that, after the decision. So my reading is that yes, once that window closes, it's closed.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we're. I get the why you landed there, but that does do away with that ability to say, hey, you forgot X, and have that that sponsor who has prepared this for at least a year be able to get X in. So they're just, I mean, it's going to be more incumbent on us on the front end then to make sure that all applicants understand that that is a hard and fast deadline and what their requirements are for submission. But that's something we'll just have to deal with at the application stage. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Any
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Chanel.
Sorry, just to your point, Wendy, I agree. And I think that some of the language in the proposed rule should hopefully help guide them. So we do spell out what is required as part of that appeal application process. And we do also say that we're not going to be taking anything, incomplete applications. Like I said, I certainly get, why we would want to have some back and forth. And I do think that it would be, there's that customer service aspect of it, just like saying, hey, you said you attached 3 things, I only see 2. But then again, I'm usually in the litigation space at the Attorney General's office, and I can just see where if we kind of build in this language where people are expecting that, you're looking at this at this time, and you've got until this time to let me know that I missed something. I see that being an area of exposure.
I totally get that. I'm my concern again, and I think I'm with you on this. I just know, I know what goes into completing these applications, and you can see a great school application where they just forgot to take something off the copy machine and stick it in, and that's, but I don't think we can do anything about that here based on what you're saying. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So
Tom, this is Eddie Smith.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
So in listening to Terrence and Wendy and Chanel's discussion last week when they had these hearings, help me, and Tess, you may have to jump in and kind of help us with this. If a charter application is denied and they have the 10 days to appeal to us, there's nothing that stops any applicant from reaching out to our staff, who can then inform them, your best option is to get it in early so that we can review to make sure everything's there. But by statute, we cannot accept anything after that 10-day, 11th hour mark. So it's in your best interest to get everything in. Is that a compromise to the liberality of what Terrence and Wendy are going for to make sure we're communicating and getting everything in, but we're still adhering to the law? And it's just not written, it's just what we express to our staff as we bring them on.
Sure, Commissioner, I'm happy to share how the state board has handled that, and it's certainly evolved over our times of hearing appeals, because although our current rules and policies very clearly outline the requirements of an appeal as the commission's rules do, similarly, we often find that applicants are not accessing that information, and therefore we often find that they are missing a piece of the required elements of the notice of appeal. What we have started doing is immediately after a local decision has been made, such that someone is able to appeal, we will email that individual detailing out the required notice of the appeal from our rule so that they do not have to go and search for it, but also letting them know that our staff is available to answer any procedural questions about the contents of the notice of appeal, and encouraging them to reach out as much as possible. I would say I want more communication with the applicants than sometimes we get, because I want to be able to tell you ahead of time that you're missing a piece. Then for, you know, if you to wait to the deadline, I don't have that opportunity. So that's how the staff, the state board, has been trying to proactively communicate to applicants. I think it's always a mixed bag of how much outreach from applicants we get prior to an appeal versus those who we never ever hear from, and then I get an email 5 minutes before the deadline where they're submitting their appeal packet.
And Eddie, I too sat into that conversation that, you know, with our committee. And I would hope as we look at this as a commission, that we go in and try to find out what are those touch points. Because if you got somebody who is waiting to the last minute to do it, I'd have questions about broader questions to find and just be considering. So I do hope that we will take this discussion, which I think was good, Terrence, that you all had, and really go back as we're setting things up and working with staff and figuring out, is there a better way? Is there a better touch point? Whatever, to try to avoid somebody at the 11th hour because they forgot something or whatever. To me, from what I've done in my career, I know things happen at the very last, but boy, if you're pushing something off as important as this to the very last minute and all of a sudden, then that to me says something about how prepared you really were, and were you willing to ask the questions, to follow through, and to Tess's point, if you're getting the outreach from the staff and you ignore it, that says something to me as an individual in just seeing how this goes. So I do think it's something that we ought to, the next time we're all together, talk about and maybe, you know, working with staff, figure out what is the best process. Because I thought the discussion came out in the right place, but appreciated the conversation that went on.
Mr. Chairman, this is Amity.
Yes.
I would also suggest, and I know at the state board staff already do this, but I would suggest that the commission consider adding Maya Bug at the Tennessee Charter School Center to a future agenda so that she can also explain to the commission how she supports charter schools in these processes. And then naturally, of course, organizations that have the right to appeal, connecting them to that technical assistance that the center offers very early on to support them in putting their application together before it makes it to the commission.
I think that's a very good recommendation. Thank you, Amity. Do we have other questions or comments about this rule? Seeing none, so may I ask for a motion to place all the proposed rules on the agenda today into a rules consent agenda? And a reminder, please give your name before you make the motion or second.
This is Alan Levine, and I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Alan. Do I have a second?
This is Wendy. I'll second.
Thank you, Wendy. Any other comments or questions? Amity, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Dave Hansen.
Aye.
Commissioner Alan Levine.
Aye.
Commissioner Terrence Patterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Derwin Sisnett. Derwin's hit thumbs up. Thank you.
Waving aye.
Commissioner Eddie Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Wendy Tucker,
Aye.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Chris Richards. I know she's on mute, so let me see if I can unmute her quickly for an audio vote. If no, I'll ask her to text me. And then Chairman and Commissioner Tom Griscom.
Aye.
We have unanimous vote. Motion passes.
Thank you. We have a second action item, which is the, one second here. The policy meetings that are under 5 on our agenda. I would again call on Committee Chair Terrence Patterson for any comments on policy items.
Our general counsel can probably speak to this as well, but the policy reads relatively closely to the rules. So there aren't significant deviations, if any. Chanel, I don't know if you want to talk to it, but we have the very same conversations and discussion in the context of the policy as we did with the rules. Chanel, I don't know if you might say that a bit better than I did.
No, certainly I agree. So policies generally, something I shared with the committee, policies generally just define or explain the rule. So a lot of the policies do and should look like the rule. So yes, a lot of the conversation that we had concerning the rules in this space also look like the policies.
Thank you. Any other comments from committee members? If not, I would entertain again a motion to approve these items on the consent agenda.
This is Wendy, so moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Eddie Smith, I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Amity, may I ask you to call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Dave Hansen,
Aye.
Commissioner Ellen Levine,
Aye.
Commissioner Terrence Patterson,
Aye.
Commissioner Derwin Cisnet, Commissioner Eddie Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Wendy Tucker,
Aye.
Commissioner Chris Richards, Chair and Commissioner Tom Griscom.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We have one final action item today, and that is to pass on first and final reading the Commission's public record policy. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I would call for a motion to approve,
So moved.
and it is
Terrence Patterson.
you. Do I have a second?
This is Wendy, I'll second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Amity, may I ask you to call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Dave Hansen,
Aye.
Commissioner Ellen Levine,
Aye.
Commissioner Terrence Patterson,
Aye.
Commissioner Derwin Cisnet. Thank you. Commissioner Eddie Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Wendy Tucker,
Aye.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Chris Richards. Definitely some audio issues there. And Chair and Commissioner Tom Griscom. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, thank you so much for your time and attention today, for helping us as we continue on this path, knowing we've got a deadline that's facing us, and the actions today were very important for us to do. I ought to mention there is a chance that we may have a call meeting before our next regular meeting in June. We will give you plenty of notice. I mean, I would anticipate right now it probably would be a Zoom meeting or Zoom type meeting again, but we will give you plenty of time in advance, because as you know, we have to notice it, but also to make sure that that the plans would meet with the schedule of commissioners. So just keep that in mind. Andy and I've been talking about a couple things that may require us to take an action before June.
Also, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Chanel just to go over the rule hearing that she's already filed the paperwork for and that date. I have yet to calendar it, but we'll do so for the commission. Chanel?
Absolutely. So part of our process for making rules requires us to have a hearing. And I shared with the committee that right now we're looking at June 9th for that date, and that'll allow the public to come out and review our proposed appellate rules, and that will be the New Start appeals rule, the renewal appeals rule, and the revocation appeals rule. And they'll be able to give comment, and from that, we will go back and see where we can incorporate some of those items. And then, so that's just one of the steps in the whole process for making a rule. And that's one reason why we are, even right now in April, going ahead and moving this train along so that we can stay on task with the timeline. Because after we finished with that portion of it from the rulemaking hearing and we take the comment, we'll send it off to the Attorney General's office for their approval, and then it'll also end up with the governor's office as well. And that whole timeline is projected to last throughout the end of the year, really. So so we're moving these items along, but yes, keep in mind that June 9th, I filed the paperwork for it with the Secretary. We'll have a rulemaking hearing at that time.
Also, now that you've had your NACSA training, there is another body of rules and policies that will have to come forward for first read. And so we'll start setting the committee meeting and working with Chanel and Angie to get those ready for committee review and then commission review also.
So Andy, to you and all the staff that's involved, let me thank you all for the continued good work. I know you've got a lot going on. You got a lot going on just in the Department of Education in this state as we're trying to figure out how we educate our children, and and then how we look at reopening schools and all of that. So I just want all the other commissioners to know it has been really, any question that's come up, the team has been there to be responsive with everything else that's going on. So I just wanted to thank you. I also want to thank commissioners for your continued work. We've done committee meetings. We've got a search process underway. We've gone forward with some rules and regulations we're going to have. So to all of you all, thank you for your continued involvement, because many of you, I know, have other obligations right now that were not necessarily what you signed up as part of your day job. So, but really appreciate it. So with that, let me stop and ask, is there any commissioner that's got any comment or question that they want to make before I get a motion to adjourn?
Commissioner, this is Eddie Smith. I've got two things. One, I know with the thought process of doing the rulemaking public hearing in June, I think our next committee meeting for the business operations is set sometime in May. And I know that there was space, Amity, that we were looking at. Is it possible we could look at tentatively having an in-person where we could kind of tour that facility and look at it if we're able to social gather, even with some distancing, more people, kind of as just a step. And then second thing is I just want to commend Terrence and Wendy and that team, because I sat in on that rulemaking and they did a yeoman's amount of work in going through all of those. So I want to publicly commend them for what they did.
Yes, absolutely. We will try to sync up those dates and runways as tightly as possible, particularly for those of you that would be driving to Nashville, so that it's worth your time and efforts.
And it may be worth, Amity, if possible, just to have somebody with, not that y'all don't have anything else you're doing, to go in and just physically take some pictures or do a short video and share it out, so we've got that that view of it as well as another way to do that, just in case we're not at a point where, everybody says, yes, it is safe to come back, even with social distancing, and do that.
Yeah, I will say though, and Eddie, maybe you can provide some thought here. I do feel like I need to get the space request moving to claim that space for the commission, or we're going to miss a window to claim it because it is very nice space. And of course, this is the time of year where other state agencies also start ramping, scaling back, moving offices. So are you comfortable with me going ahead and claiming the space now, even though you haven't seen it?
I'll speak for myself. This is Eddie again. On the call we were in, listening to you, listening to the state board as they kind of described that their space was move-in ready.
Yeah.
I feel fairly confident that it would be a good space, even not having seen it. So I have no problem going ahead and making that recommendation.
Okay. At least to get the paperwork started.
Yeah, I thought that was
Think
something
important.
Eddie, at our committee that we talked about, is to get that process under. Right.
Yeah. We'll get that moving.
Great. Thank you, Eddie. Anybody else have a comment for the good of the cause? Again, thank you. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Eddie.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Terrence Patterson.
Thank you. All those in favor, we'll do this first vote. Amity, say aye, and you can click off. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Aye.